I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember bacon makes everything better.
Welcome back into another edition of Time Out, the Tobacco Road Basketball Show. Each week here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I am Mike Waddell. He is David Glenn. We're also joined by the coach, Kerry, Keating, and each week we keep you up to date on the growing trends around college basketball here on Tobacco Road with North Carolina, Duke, NC State, and Wake Forest. Our show is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Pork Council, supporting more than 44,000 North Carolinians who work in the $10.4 billion pork industry. Bacon, it makes everything better, and we do have bacon and basketball on our minds. Coming up in March, it'll be our second annual extravaganza, our men's and women's basketball bracket contest. And we'll also see if you go in both directions for the men and the women's bracket, who has the combined top score, and they will be named the North Carolina Hoops Hog. Right here, it's bacon and basketball on the North Carolina Sports Network. More about that coming up. This past weekend, fellas, busy weekend of basketball, as you would expect. We're in the heat of it right here in the ACC. We're going to talk about that big Duke win over North Carolina. We might even talk a little bit about the Georgia Tech win over Louisville, 77-70. But Wake Forest, perhaps with the biggest surprise weekend win, they get it at home in the Joel, 76-74 over Pitt. And NC State could not hold on after a valiant performance at the Lenovo Center. They go down to Clemson, 68-58. Coach, David, any surprises for you in our weekend of ACC basketball here in the Big Four?
I don't know if I would say surprises, Mike, and it's great to be with you and Coach again, but I would say that whereas most of the national spotlight was on Duke, Carolina, as it usually is, that was not the most important result of the weekend. Most of us thought the Blue Devils would convincingly beat the Tar Heels, especially with that game being at Cameron Indoor Stadium. That's exactly what happened. You know, the longest team in the league smothered one of the shorter teams in the league. And the Blue Devils' Cooper Flagg just showcased why he's going to be the ACC Player of the Year and maybe even the National Player of the Year. The more important results were involved bubble teams right here in our backyard. Wake Forest desperately needed another resume builder, and they got it against Pitt. Tyler Johnson continues to come along as a point guard for the Demon Deacons. Hunter Salas is that first-team All-ACC caliber talent. Cameron Hildreth had a really good game against the Panthers. And then maybe not quite as important, but Stanford and SMU still want to believe that they can get in the NCAA tournament mix. They played each other this weekend, and the Mustangs absolutely hammered the Cardinal 85-61, that game in Dallas. So we still have the top three of Duke and Clemson and Louisville. We still have 5 or 6 teams after that hoping they can be NCAA tournament teams. But whereas much of the glow came from Cameron Indoor Stadium, I thought those 2 other games were much more impactful in terms of looking forward to Selection Sunday in the NCAA tournament.
Maybe the biggest surprise for me, Mike, David, is that Duke didn't win by 40 the way that game started out. Put it into cruise control in the second half and got the result that everybody expected. I concur. I think from a league standpoint, obviously you're trying to get as many teams as you can. And we're at this point now, we talked about this in the past, where the last 4 of maybe 8 teams that might not get in the tournament may all be ACC teams. So we're eating our own right now. And absolutely, and again, a huge victory for SMU. I'm a little surprised by Stanford, having seen them play, thought they can get a little bit of momentum and kind of sneak up to be that team. But one thing stands out when you start to look at numbers, and everyone loves to be a numbers guy when February comes around to figure out what happens in March, is a non-conference schedule that both SMU and Stanford have played. When you look at them possibly being a team that could sneak up, maybe more now SMU than Stanford, their non-conference strength of schedule, 264 and 268 respectively, nowhere near what the other 4 or 5 teams that are kind of lingering in the ACC right now, outside of obviously Duke and Clemson. They're all in the top 50. The committee loves to look for reasons why not. Coaches always want to give reasons why. This is what happens when you see the postscript after the 68 are selected, if you will. And it's why not? Why not? Well, this is why. Well, one of the why nots and one of the whys is really, who did you play if you didn't win enough of those games? And even if you did, who were they? And in the case of SMU and Stanford, especially with SMU now kind of moving themselves back to that potential 5th spot, it's that non-conference strength of schedule that could be very impactful, because I think the ACC, when the national picture comes into play, is going to be maligned for its Duke and everybody else. And Clemson's nice and Louisville's nice, but when we're talking about 16 teams, right? How can we get to these top 16 seeds? You're only going to see one ACC team even remotely close to that, obviously being Duke. So I think it's going to be a lot of criticism on the league as a whole when you take into account the amount of teams that are not there, as opposed to the ones that are there, and what the ones that are there have done in the non-conference. And in the case of SMU, not something stellar to kind of build their resume on.
Original Salt Works has become a legendary breakfast, brunch, and lunch place in Wilmington for both locals and out-of-town visitors over the last 50-plus years. Our good friend Bob Hubbard owns the place, but he's also the one cooking your food and often roaming the dining room to greet you with a smile and to make sure your visit is a great one. Bob has been running the show at this unique roadside diner for more than 20 years now, and he and his friendly, hardworking staff aim to treat you like one of their own. Try Bob's homemade omelets, or special recipe grits for breakfast, or his legendary cheeseburgers for lunch. The Original Salt Works, your breakfast and lunch choice on Oleander Drive in Wilmington. The Lawson Insurance Group in Raleigh is a family-owned business led by 3 actual brothers who happen to be huge sports fans: Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. To learn more, search Lawson Insurance Group online. The Lawson Insurance website will be the first link that pops up.
XL Moving and Storage bringing us our big things this week. The thing that Coach and DG have had burning in their belly. DG, I know one thing that's on your mind is who is going to emerge from the middle of the pack in the ACC, perhaps to make that big run here as we get closer and closer to March.
Yeah, Mike, my big thing this week is a matter of perspective. I think many of us can be creatures of the moment, and when you're entirely in the moment, you can lose perspective. So it's a reminder that even though there's only about a month left, roughly, in college basketball's regular season as we gather today, there definitely is still enough time for the middle of the pack teams to figure things out. And I am not just talking about the easier to remember miracle run like NC State's double whammy last year when the Wolfpack were the 10th place team in the ACC before they win the ACC tournament and make that amazing run to the Final Four. Just last year as well, listen to this, with 1 month remaining in the regular season, roughly the circumstances as we speak this year, Clemson was 14-7 overall, and the Tigers had a losing record in conference play at this time last year. They were 4-6 in the ACC. What did they do? They went 7-3 down the stretch. They got a lot of credit, well-deserved, for some of their big early season non-conference victories that, as Coach mentioned, Stanford and SMU and some of the other candidates this year from the ACC lack. And the Tigers made the NCAA tournament after that late season run as a pretty strong number 6 seed. And they advanced all the way to the Elite Eight, which, by the way, tied the longest postseason run in the history of Clemson basketball. So those are 2 examples, State and Clemson, from just a year ago. Carolina fans can remember 3 years ago. In Hubert Davis's first season as a head coach, Carolina got absolutely annihilated by Duke. That one was at the Smith Center in early February 3 years ago. That dropped the Heels record to 16-7, 8-4 in the ACC. And because of a lack of high-quality wins, that left the Heels squarely on the NCAA tournament bubble, just as they are now. Then what happened? Carolina goes 7-1 down the stretch 3 years ago. They beat a good Clemson team at Clemson. They beat a good Virginia Tech team at the time in Blacksburg. And most famously, they beat a very good Duke team in Coach K's final game at Cameron Indoor Stadium. If you beat Coach K on Coach K court, that's pretty impressive as the guy is moving into retirement. Those Tar Heels rode that wave built in the late season all the way to a career-ending victory over Coach K in the Final Four, famously, and then that trip for the Tar Heels to the national championship game. One more quick example from longer ago. In the year 2000, under Coach Bill Guthridge, Carolina was, listen to this record, 13-9 in early February, 4-4 in conference play. That doesn't sound very good. And again, it was the definition of a bubble team. And that was not an elite UNC roster, by the way. The Heels' best players were Joseph Forte, Brendan Haywood, Jason Capel, Ed Cota, Chris Lang, guys like Max Owens and Julius Peppers coming off the bench. I mean, those are good players, but that's not a juggernaut Carolina team by any means. And that team, after 13-9 in early February, got a little better down the stretch. Enough to get into the big dance as a mediocre seed. They were number 8 that year after a very mediocre, wait for this, 18-13 record on Selection Sunday. That's what the Tar Heels had on their resume. They got in, and because of their late season improvement, they made a run under Bill Guthridge all the way to the Final Four that year. This year in the ACC, the top 3 teams obviously are Duke and Clemson and Louisville, so they're fine. But that second tier that we've been talking about, the teams that are not dead yet, but that better play well down the stretch if they want or expect an NCAA bid, it includes, to me, 5 teams: Pitt, Carolina, Wake, SMU, and Stanford. I'm not a big believer in SMU or Stanford, in part because of those non-conference schedules, although they've had nice starts as new members of the ACC. On the other hand, I personally believe that Pitt, UNC, and Wake Forest are all capable enough, are all combinations of talent and experience that they have the ability to pull themselves together and build resumes that are worthy of the NCAA tournament. It is a matter of sticking together, playing smarter, playing tougher in some cases, and just scraping together enough quality wins to get an invitation to the big dance. Once you're there, anything can happen. But the bottom line is, even though it is early February, and the clock is ticking pretty loudly on these bubble teams at this point, this sort of late season surge can be done, has been done, will be done again by someone, maybe even one or more of those middle of the pack ACC teams this season.
Yeah, David, I'll pick apart Wake Forest at that, which may be an indictment of the strength of the conference when you imagine the fact that in their last 9 games, they have a very favorable home schedule at Joel: Georgia Tech, Notre Dame, Virginia, Florida State, all by numbers very winnable games. When you go on the road for 5 games, and we'll kind of write the Duke win off or game off as a win for Duke, but at NC State, at SMU, at Cal, at Stanford, you've got to get 3 of those 4. I think if you go 7-2, if you're Wake, if you're 15-5 in this conference, you're basically putting it on the committee. Okay, this is really where they're going to tell us if the ACC is what they think it is, what we feel it is, what everyone else knows that it is: Duke and 19 other teams. And to that matter, my big thing is, I have been in this conference way back in the mid-90s, and now I'm bookending it, coming back and helping you guys cover it now, almost 25, 30 years later. When was the last time anyone went undefeated in a conference? And David, of course, the scribe that he is in the encyclopedia of the ACC, 1999 Duke team. It's very, very possible that 25-year stretch ends with a 20-0 run by Duke. That team just looks like a team that's completely different than everybody else. The way that they play, the way they play together, the length that they have, the guys on their roster that would be top 3 players at almost any other school in the league that are in the 6 and 7 range here. I mean, the depth that they have. The only thing that can derail Duke at this point from having a shot at that, and a very real shot, and it's very hard to do because, shots can go in, shots cannot go in every once in a while, is health. Well, they just withstood that with Brown coming back after 2 weeks out, coming right back into the lineup and defending. Like, it's almost inevitable that they're going to be that team that's going to have a chance to replicate what their brethren in 1999 did and go undefeated in the ACC. How it gets adjudicated, if you will, by the committee, and then you look at Wake. If Wake is 23-9, 15-5, and then tack on whatever happens in the ACC tournament and doesn't make the tournament, it's more of an indictment on how weak the rest of the ACC is, obviously, and how strong Duke is at the top. Just an amazing dichotomy we have in the ACC after all these years of strength. And you guys know better than anyone else how this league has been. It'll be really, really interesting to see how this next month treats the league, or how the league kind of treats itself to be ready to be presented to the rest of the country come March and Selection Sunday.
I am a better person and a more effective business owner for having known and learned from Emily Parks over many years now. Emily's company, Organize for Success, helps multi-passionate business owners and executives bring harmony to all the layers of their lives, from work to side projects, from friends and family to hobbies, community, and beyond. With Emily's help, you too can make every minute matter. She helps you determine what earns your time and how to efficiently accomplish what matters. One of the many things I love about Emily is that she does not impose her will on her clients. She listens to them. That way she can better help them cultivate the lives they want to live. You can set up a complimentary call with Emily today by visiting organizeforsuccess.com.
This segment brought to you by our great friends at Atlantic Tire and Service, where DG and his family take all of their vehicles for routine maintenance, service needs, and a world-class selection of new tires. Atlantic Tire and Service, your one-stop tire and auto repair provider with highly trained technicians and a sales and support staff that are second to none. They've grown to 6 Triangle area locations, 2 in Raleigh, 2 in Kerry, 1 in Durham, and 1 in Wake Forest. You can learn more online at AtlanticTireOnline.com.
Let's get into our first big topic of the week, and that's the Duke-Carolina game from Saturday night. And no, we're not going to beat to death the fact that Duke beat Carolina, curb stomped them at Cameron Indoor Stadium. We're not going to talk about the X's and O's. But what we will talk about here in this first topic of our week is the back-end support for basketball at Duke compared to North Carolina. A very simple website check of both GoDuke.com and GoHeels.com reveals that Duke has 14 non-coaches, non-strength coach, non-trainers, 14 support personnel, including 4 who are directly motivated to only raise money for the Duke Legacy Fund supporting John Shire and the Blue Devils program. Whereas Hubert Davis, who, like Shire, is a first-time head coach and former player, versed in everything Carolina, is only given 7 people to support his program, and none of those listed on the Carolina website as basketball-centric employees are focused on bringing in resources. And resources can be spent in a variety of ways, but especially on NIL. When you look at that Duke team, how long they are, how talented they are, how high-ranking the recruits were, and then look at North Carolina, who still has some very good recruits, but they missed on a lot of their portal targets last year, and none of the portal players coming into Chapel Hill this year had been difference makers. Gentlemen, to me, a former director of athletics, I look at this kind of stuff and you just kind of shake your head and say, why has North Carolina not supported with staffing, with personnel, their men's basketball program, which is the bell cow for this athletics department? They didn't do it for Mac Brown either, DG. and they swept the Tar Heels' winningest football coach out of Chapel Hill back in November, and they bring in Bill Belichick, and now all of a sudden they have a former NFL general manager and Michael Lombardi helping set Carolina's personnel on the right track. Bill Belichick has been set up for success. It seems like not only Mac Brown, but maybe Hubert Davis has been abandoned by the people who put him into a job that perhaps he was not totally prepared for on and off the court.
Well, Mike, you can tell that you're a longtime athletic director and assistant AD with the way you formed that question, which I appreciate. I have two observations on this. The first one is relatively quick. If you're UNC's athletic director, Bubba Cunningham, if Hubert Davis scrapes together enough wins to make the NCAA tournament, because he's a guy who's already taken the Heels to an to a national championship game, because he's a guy who's already taken the Heels just last year to the ACC regular season title, and if he gets into this year's big dance, that would be 3 out of 4. Hubert's job is going to be safe in that scenario. If somehow Hubert Davis misses the NCAA tournament for the second time in his 4 years, it's not good enough at Carolina, we all know, to make it half the time to the NCAA tournament, which they made virtually every year for many decades since the tournament expanded to 64, now 68 teams. Well, we all know Bubba Cunningham has a trickier decision to make, and I believe the decision would boil down to the issue that you're raising. You either believe that Hubert Davis is a good coach and he hasn't gotten enough support, so you keep him and you build a better support staff, or you believe Hubert Davis is not the right guy for the job, and then you build that stronger support staff around whoever is next. So we'll leave that as something we can revisit in future weeks. The other part of my answer has to do with that stronger support staff around Jon Scheyer at Duke. I don't think Carolina needs every one of these people, but just a couple quick examples at Duke. Mike Schrage is listed as a special assistant to the head coach. Much like our friend Kerry Keating, that's a long-time Division I head coach. In Coach Keating's case at Santa Clara, man, that speaks for itself. You got to the top level of college basketball, Division I, good conference, and you held that job for a long time. Mike Schrage was the head coach at Elon University, right here in our backyard. And he is a special assistant to the head coach. I mean, put aside Jon Scheyer's full-time assistants. That is some high IQ. That is some big-time experience. That is a high-caliber individual who's not even in a full-time assistant coaching position. I don't see that kind of bench depth on the coaching and support staff at Carolina. Beyond that, Rachel Baker, general manager at Duke, much like Andrew Luck at Stanford in football, Rachel Baker is becoming a trendsetter. This is a trailblazing position. It's a relatively new concept in college sports, and she is hitting home runs and grand slams in her position. It would be wise for anybody, including Carolina, to study how Duke is doing it, study what her role is, ask yourself if you need somebody, whether you call it general manager or not, the way that's Rachel Baker's title at Duke. What you call it doesn't matter, but what she does to help Jon Scheyer win certainly does matter. You mentioned the Legacy Fund, and your background, again, as an AD, can underline the importance of fundraising in a broad sense, but also specifically in this case, the men's basketball sense. And finally, Duke, on that 14-person outline that Mike mentioned, Duke has a director of scouting and analytics. And, if I have a great coach on my staff, Kerry Keating, I'm going to ask him what kind of guys he likes, right? But I'm going to back up the eyeball test and whatever other philosophical information Coach Keating would give me. I'm going to hand to my director of scouting and analytics, whose job does not include trying to beat the Tar Heels on Saturday night or prepare for the next opponent or build a better basketball team over this next month, right? Coach Scheyer and all those other top-level guys are worried about those things, as they should be. Your director of scouting and analytics can seek out players the way Alan Huss at High Point University here in our backyard has done a brilliant job of in his 2 years at High Point. He has very specific things he's looking for style-wise, and some of those things can even be seen through crunching numbers, if you will. It's not entirely crunching numbers, but it sort of filters out guys so that at the end you can just hand Coach Keating and his coaches, hey, we think these guys sound like good fits. You take it from here. You look at video at these 4 at this position instead of these 25 that you don't have time and we don't want you spending your time on. Here's a shorter list of better fits, and then you take it from there because maybe the numbers missed something. All that's being done at Duke, and not as much of it is being done at Carolina and a lot of other places. So this is not just a UNC issue. It's in place at a lot of places, but Duke, just like they're setting the trend on the court and winning at the highest level, they're setting this new world trend behind the scenes as well. And that's something that if you're trying to beat the Blue Devils, you better learn from how they're doing things right now.
What do you think, Kerry?
DG, I appreciate you nominating me to be Hubert's special assistant. I would gladly take that role. Call me anything you want. I've been called 10 times worse, whatever it may be. A lot to unpack here. And you know, we talked in our open about Duke's depth on the court. The more important depth may be in this office. It may be the deepest roster that exists of its kind in the country. When you go through and you look at it, you mentioned Coach Schrage, you know, a former head coach. I know that some guys in the past have had this and kind of hid in the gray area of trying to put that person on their staff, but now it's out in the ether. And don't forget now, guys, John sat on the bench with Coach K as the coach in waiting to literally get himself ready to coach. And what's apparent to me, and maybe even more important than that it wasn't that John was getting himself prepared to coach. All of this was getting set up because this wasn't necessarily in place A to Z when Coach was in his last year, mostly due in part because Coach K was that guy and understood that ahead of time and had 4 really good assistants and then a plethora of younger people on support staff and administrative personnel, and there were people running around. Keep in mind also, guys, that the assistant AD and the head of that legacy fund is Coach K's oldest daughter. There is transition here to the legacy, aptly named, of what Coach K put in place and now John has. And when you look at John and just his body language, his facial expressions, his just physical appearance, and you did a side-by-side of John and Hubert before the game, during the game, after the game, weekly press conference, probably in practice, it's like 40 years difference. Like Hubert is aging like the wrong way. And I'm saying this as a former head coach who, by the way, in my first full-time job in college basketball, when I left Wake Forest as a video coordinator, I went to be a
full head of hair.
I had a lot more hair, and it was a lot darker. But when I went to Vanderbilt in a full-time position with Buzz Peterson, Randy Monroe, and then Charles Davis filled in later, we didn't have even a graduate assistant. I was the youngest guy in the staff, every single scouting report, ran all the camps, hired all the managers, worked with the guards, did all the scheduling, did all the travel at 23 years old. And I remember those days like I loved it. You know, you couldn't give me any more to do it. That every single one of those jobs right now is singularly held by a person, and in most cases has an assistant with them. Oh, and by the way, for the old school guys, video exchange. And we can have a whole show about how video exchange used to work with VHS tapes and this pay it forward trail of like hope that it gets through the postal system 20 times over unscathed. But my point is, like, basketball circles for years always used to say the best coaching job in basketball is an NBA assistant coach. Yes, you get paid well, but you literally do nothing but coach basketball. You don't even do the scouting reports. You present them, but all the guys in the back are doing it for them. Now they've brought those guys out to the forefront to put them on the bench. This is an NBA type of not even front office, but operational office that is existing at Duke right now. And what it has also done, and credit to the Duke staff for putting the roster together, because yes, you still have to have the product out there, but there are mirror images of the product on the floor at Duke and the product behind closed doors at Duke right now in spades. And what it's resulting is, as we talked about, a potential 20-0 year in the ACC, a number one seed, and everyone's going to be all hemming and hawing about Cooper Flagg and the number one seed. And I'm telling you now, the depth on this program is unmatched in the country, and that's why they're at where they're at. Now, the general manager position, the special assistant to the head coach, there are a plethora of former head coaches, myself included, who would love to be involved in this, because you want, as a coach, the guy in charge, and this was always my personal go-to as an assistant coach. What's my job? My job is to make the head coach's job easier. He's the head coach. He makes all the decisions, full stop. What can I do to free him up? In my case, where I went, it was handle recruiting. Take all of that out off his plate. That's a big part of it. Well, as we know nowadays, it's that times 10. It's NIL, it's handlers, it's one and done, it's finances, it's transfer portal, it's the schedule, it's the people. It's just coming at Hubert a million miles an hour right now. Whereas I think your point is probably the most valid one, David, in all of this. Strip all of that away at the end of the season, regardless of the results at Carolina, regardless of the comparison and the staff and the support, Carolina and Duke. Does Bubba Cunningham, in his heart of hearts, really believe that if all things were equal and he had to put his money on a guy to coach the team to a win that day, is that guy Hubert Davis? Then he absolutely should be the coach in North Carolina. For all of the things that Coach Williams loves about him, that the players love about him, that everyone else loved about him when they went to the Final Four, even last year on the run to the ACC championship. Can he coach basketball? In all likelihood, the answer to that is yes. Now the decision looms, okay, can Hubert realize these things and have a Carolina degree? Can we go out and hire the best people possible that will be loyal to our program to get this brand to where it needs and should be and rightfully get restored, and let me coach the team? I think the answer is yes. The million-dollar question, if you will, is, are they ready to do that? And the unfortunate problem is, as we know, they're doing it right down the road. And that's hard enough as it is when they're kicking the crap out of you on the court. Now they're doing it in the office, and Duke's doing it. Well, that's like the worst thing you could do. It'll skew a Carolina mind in 10 seconds. That Duke, and once you mention that Duke's doing something or not, all of a sudden you lose all rational thought. You just want to go out. You want to go out. They got to take a step back, take a deep breath, and realize all hope is not lost. Kids still want to go to Carolina. The state is flush with talent. The area is flush with talent. Can Hubert coach them? Can Bubba make that decision? Can they use, I think, Belichick and the crew over there as a smokescreen, if you will? Look over here, and get the program organized. And I think the last point of this is, I think that the best part about this in this current environment is you can do it quickly. You can do it quickly because you can restock your roster with talent more now, quicker than you ever could before. What they need to do quickly is, as we mentioned, get the depth off the court matched to their liking at Carolina, like Duke has already put depth off the court in these 14 people that Michael mentioned that are supporting Coach Shire and the Blue Devils on the court currently.
You talk about the fact that they're doing this down the road at Duke. They're doing it across the street at the Keating Football Center right now. And for all of the criticism that I and others gave to the Board of Trustees that were perhaps going beyond their job description to force the change in football, you got to ask yourself, why hasn't this been obvious for basketball before football? Basketball is the bell cow at Carolina. Perhaps Hubert Davis is paying for the sins of another former Tar Heel who came back to be the head coach, Matt Doherty, who came in and swept everybody out. Didn't want to be disloyal to his staff at Notre Dame. Brought in Doug Wojcik, Fred Quartelbaum, others, and it didn't work. So when Hubert came in, it's like, well, I've got to have a guy that played for Coach Smith, got to have a guy that played with Coach Guthridge, and got to have a guy that played for Coach Williams. We got to keep it all Carolina guys. And there really wasn't any change from the Roy Williams model from when he came in from Kansas to when he took over and did all of the great things that he did at Carolina. When Duke hired Rachel Baker, somebody with NBA and Nike experience right there, that was a wow. They did that. I remember calling some of my friends over at Duke and saying, wow, that's a pretty cool hire. And then when you look at how they put this all together, you just got to wonder why North Carolina's administration, and this is on Bubba Cunningham. That's your job as the director of athletics, to put your coaches in a position to succeed, especially when you have a brand new head coach that has really only been a coach for less than 10 years when he got the head coaching job at North Carolina, supposedly one of the best jobs in all of college basketball. And you just kind of wonder, Coach Smith, when I worked there from 91 to 94, had an absolute superstar in the office. David, you'll remember this person. She's the daughter of a former Chapel Hill Mayor, Howard Lee. We're talking about Angela Lee, an Ivy League lawyer that helped in so many ways Carolina basketball do things in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. She did so many great things off the court to support Carolina basketball. And then when she was pushed out by Matt Doherty, they just kind of settled into this very, very comfortable place. It's about investing into the program and having that wisdom to bring in a Mitch Kupchak, a Larry Brown, not full-time. LB is not going to do that full-time, but bring him in to scout. The guy is an absolute basketball genius. A Buzz Peterson, all these former players that are around. Do you think they couldn't fill these spots? I mean, there is a talent depth that is almost endless in terms of basketball knowledge, especially with the NBA and the management and how these things work. And they're just watching like we are right now. Very frustrating to hear so many fans call for the head of a head coach who's doing everything he can, but literally right now, my analogy for this, and it's very apropos with the Daytona 500 coming up, North Carolina is entering a Kia in the Daytona 500. They're not supporting it. They don't have a Chevy or a Ford or a Toyota. They're putting a Kia in that realm. And it's not fair to those athletes. It's not fair to those coaches. It's not fair to this staff to expect them to be doing things that they're just not set up to do.
Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE. King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach is the longest running restaurant in New Hanover County. That's since 1947, and it recently was renovated to an impeccable degree by our good friends Jimmy Galeese and his amazing wife Keating. Their outstanding chefs offer fresh local seafood, salad options, and creative, tasty variations of pork, beef, and poultry dishes. King Neptune has always been a great choice for dinner and/or drinks, and now it's open for lunch and brunch too. Check out the lunch, brunch, and dinner menus at neptuneswb.com. That's Neptunes with an S, then WB for Wrightsville Beach. Again, the King Neptune Restaurant website is neptuneswb.com.
All right, let's move on to our second topic of the week. NC State, the Wolfpack, in 17th place right now out of 18 teams in the Atlantic Coast Conference. Kerry, David, if you were Boo Corrigan, would you be having a little buyer's remorse right now about extending Kevin Keatts following last season's run to the Final Four? Or is this perhaps just another example of fans having irrational expectations given the personnel changes that the Wolfpack went through, or even a byproduct of the ACC being behind by $20-some million in that media money that could help fund the NIL and other things that we've talked about earlier in today's show?
Yeah, from my understanding, Mike, it sounded like Boo was put between a rock and a hard place after the results triggered some contractual obligations that he had to Kevin, given the fact that those results were winning the ACC tournament and then getting to the Final Four. Now, be that as it may, you can always assess the financial projections, that's a tough projection to make if you're NC State. I mean, that's more of a question on the former AD than it is on the coach. Because you're the coach, it's like, hey, I just won. We're trying to build this, extend. You know, it's hard to replicate the fact, and David knows this, as he mentioned about last year's standings and where we were last year at this point in the ACC and what happened in the case of Clemson going on a run. Obviously, NC State finishing 10th and making a magical run to not only win the ACC but get to the Final Four. I'm not sure that it's about buyer's remorse as much as you can't always rely on that replicating itself, especially when you just obviously look at where it came from, how it started, what the basis was. You would hope that there were a lot of conversations in the offseason on how we're going to try to sustain this, or at least get ready for another cycle of a run that will keep the Wolfpack faithful happy. Compete in the middle of the conference, maybe go in and steal one from the big 2 or 3, and then find yourself in the middle or the top of the pack based on the fact that you had some success that can be attractive to the transfer portal. You did it with transfers. You know, you've done it with kids that are kind of wild and free. You've got a kind of style that may be attractive to a lot of the kids in the portal that may not have had that freedom elsewhere. It had success and obviously got them to a chance two games in a national title. The finances involved are always going to dictate whether you're going to do this or not. Unfortunately, that's just the way of the world now. And it's even way more of the way of the world now than ever before. I don't know if there's any change that can happen other than a heart-to-heart conversation with Boo and with Kevin. How are we going about doing this? Maybe not to the extent and the level that we've already talked about in the differences in the comparison to Carolina and Duke. But I'm really curious as to where NC State is with this as well, because I think this is something that the entire league is going to need to do. Obviously spearheaded, you know, as we aptly described with Duke. But I think State, and you look at State, they've got staff, they've got depth on the chart. Like they have a chance to do this. And I know this now, having lived in Raleigh for the last 4 years. There are an unbelievable amount of Wolfpack people running around here. I mean, like, they stay here. They clearly come to school here, and it's like, we're in. We are in. We're packed forever. Like, they would love nothing more than to have some sort of even tiny piece of ownership in really putting together something comprehensive at State. That's not going to be, hey, we're going to beat Duke and beat Carolina, but we're going to be a clear number 3 in this league every year from how we support this, how we go about this, what we expect. I think it's realistic that if you did set it up that way and there was clear, you know, alignment between Boo and between Kevin, that should be the expectation. It definitely isn't finishing 17 out of 20 in a league that we've already talked about this year is, for the most part, maybe the weakest it's ever been, if not in most recent years, maybe ever before. This is a time that they had a chance to make that run. And obviously, you go back and look at their results. They were, as I mentioned, we wanted to change their names from Wolfpack to Horseshoes and Hand Grenades. Mm-hmm. They were the king of the close losses. So, you know, you might be on the different end of that, but here you are again with all of these losses, 10 and under, 5 and under, 6 and under, 2 possession losses. They've now lost, 6 games in a row? It's a tough time to be on the road for 2 games across the country in 3 time zones coming off a 6-game losing streak. So buyer's remorse, maybe, but I think a hard reset is coming after this season for Boo and for Kevin.
I'm glad Coach brought up the contract language because, Mike, one of the things that was hardest for me to do as a contract law attorney myself here in North Carolina for a long time was to convince my clients that this variety of clauses we write into a contract might matter someday. So all 3 of us, as relatively smart guys, can picture when Kevin Keats' contract was being written and his agent said, hey, how about a clause in there that if Kevin wins the ACC tournament, he gets an automatic 2-year extension? I mean, we're pretty smart guys. I think probably all 3 of us would have said, yeah, that sounds fair, right? Like, if the guy leads this school to their first ACC title since, 1987? A 2-year automatic built-in extension doesn't sound unreasonable. I mean, I'm trying to give Boo Corrigan, you know, and the other NC State decision makers the benefit of the doubt here. In a vacuum, it certainly doesn't sound unreasonable. Holy cow, he takes us to those heights that we haven't seen in almost 4 decades. Of course he deserves some kind of benefit. And in this case, it was not discretionary that Kevin Keats' contract now goes to 2030. It was written in, right? Now, your point as a longtime AD is more about, well, if it were discretionary, should they have done it?
Right.
And this is what's interesting to me, and I wonder Coach's thoughts and yours, because you guys are the perfect Coach AD combination. I always understood as a journalist when a coach would say, hey, man, I need at least a 4 or 5 year deal. Otherwise, all these moms and dads are saying, I don't think Joey is going to get to play for Coach Keating all the way through his graduation. And so the coach has a point there. And you got to either decide, as Coach was just referring to Bubba Cunningham's view of Hubert Davis, either deep down in my heart, he's my guy, or deep down in my heart, I'm not sure he's my guy. Well, if he's my guy, I got to give him 4 to 5, because certainly for most of my time in college athletics, the coach had a legitimate point about needing that 4 or 5 year deal. I wonder to what degree that is changing, where you, Mike, as the AD, could say to Coach as maybe a coach that you love and respect and admire, hey, man, the world has changed enough that we're all microwaving basketball teams, maybe on a 1 year basis, at most a 2 year basis. So in that hypothetical where Coach Keats won the ACC, not hypothetically, did win the ACC tournament. He did go to the Final Four. But in the hypothetical where it was not an automatic contract extension, I think a modern AD could say, Kevin, what you just did is amazing. We love you. We think you're well compensated. You're already signed through 2028. That means you could actually still tell the guys in the transfer portal, I'm here for, my contract is 4 more years after the one we just finished. To me, that's reasonable, but it gets down to a delicate conversation. The guy who just took the school to this place they hadn't been in a long time wants, he wants to fill the kitty. And it's a hard conversation to have if you're skeptical about an extension as the AD. You're almost implying, hey, if you can get much bigger bucks elsewhere after this Final Four run, go ahead. And that fractures a relationship a little bit between coach and AD. My last point on this is, and maybe it's best, I'll elaborate a different time, but remember Coach Keats told us on our show, hey, man, because of this run, transfers are looking at us differently than they did a month ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, 4 years ago. The bottom line is, in my opinion, State went 2 out of 5 on the transfer trail, I'll say. Marcus Hill is a nice guard, not elite, but a good guard from Bowling Green. Dontrez Styles, the former Tar Heel, I think has been good for the Wolfpack, the Georgetown transfer. But they got the Canadian kid who must be hard to evaluate, but he was the #1 pick in Canada's professional league draft. Now, I don't know what that means. How does that translate to major college basketball? I don't know, but he's been a bit player for them. Mike James, the Louisville guard. It's always dangerous, in my opinion, to take a guy from a horrendously bad team. Even if he had good numbers, it's a roll of the dice. I'd rather take Hunter Salas from Gonzaga, who could barely make the court, but I knew he played for Mark Few. And I knew while he was an off-the-bench player for 2 years under Mark Few, he learned a lot of good basketball habits, right? Sure enough, he becomes a first-team All-ACC guy at Wake Forest. The 2 guys State got from those horrendously bad Louisville teams, Brandon Huntley-Hatfield is a so-so big man. Mike James has been injured and hasn't contributed at all. So that's 5 major college transfers. To me, only 2 being nice have worked out. That's not, you got to capitalize more than that on your Final Four run in your ACC title. Otherwise, you're going to be 17th in an 18-team ACC.
It's been 41 years, that drought for NC State from 1983 to 2024 to make it back to the Final Four. So the natural thing would be, hey, let's give Kevin all the money that he needs. He just made a lot of money for us with his NCAA shares. But Kerry, you know this, if you've not been recruiting guys for a while in the portal, and let's get away from, well, they had to wait until the end of the Final Four. Bullshit. You're contacting people throughout the season. If you're doing it right and you have your scouting and your general manager or whoever's doing your player personnel, you're constantly evaluating what's available out there. Just because they made it to the Final Four, if they just got active in that portal? Hell no, they're not going to bring anybody in. And nobody was looking at them realistically as a place that they wanted to land. If Carolina couldn't do it with their recent success, how is NC State going to do it? They were the nouveau riche in terms of basketball parlance in 2024. Man, I think this is a real tough spot for Boo Corrigan. If I'm going to sit there and criticize Bubba Cunningham, I'm going to at least say for Boo Corrigan, I got to give him a little bit of a break because, as you said, David, Boo was in between a rock and a hard place. He had to give that extension. Now you got to sit back and say, hey, do I want to go ahead and pay a 5-year buyout for this guy who still makes a relatively low salary and go out and get a guy? I'm going to play this guess'em game like a Will Wade. I've known Will Wade for a long time. Okay. He would fit at NC State. Kerry, I don't know if you agree with that. What do you think about the lack of development of NC State following that Final Four run?
Well, there's a couple things here. We talked about potentially Bubba stripping it all down and just having the one-on-one with Hubert, and that's his guy. If Boo, take all of the other ancillary factors out, feels that Kevin can coach the team properly, he may not be in a position a la Duke to staff 14 people behind Kevin. Maybe he is. Maybe they want to make that change. You never really know. Obviously, Wolfpack football has its own little weird thing that I'm trying to figure out since I've been here too, that kind of lingers, right? And they're like just good enough to be exciting, but then they kind of go away. I don't really know if that plays into the thought process for Boo. But if there's two things, if you put me in that seat to say, okay, I'm married to Kevin for at least to 28 as we originally agreed, and maybe I'll eat the 2 years that I said that I put into the former contract, and I'll invest that money to get someone new in, or I'll make the investment to say, listen, let me go out, let's go out and find a former head coach that doesn't recruit for you, that doesn't do anything but just kind of sit in your seat and help you have some clarity. Because I think from all intents and purposes, look, Kevin had success coaching at Wilmington. He clearly had success recruiting at Louisville. He had success, I remember recruiting his kids, watching him coach at Hargrave. I think he can coach basketball. It's you sometimes get caught up in the whirlwind of exactly how it gets done in the micro and in the macro. And I think from Kevin's perspective, it would be helpful to have that. The other part of this too, and Mike, you touched on this, if you can't attract the same type of kids historically and even currently in a head-up recruiting battle versus the two teams right down the road in your own league, and talking about Duke and Carolina. And if you've now been given this ability and you've shown that it can work in some parts, a la last year, to go into the transfer portal, I'd offer this. I remember doing this. I did it for 2 years for the Houston Rockets. I went to literally every single Golden State Warriors game when I lived in California. And my sole job during that game, when I was done with my pregame radio duties, was to sit there and watch the other team play and then put together detailed reports of every guy on the roster. I went 3 hours before the game to watch guys on the first bus warm up and shoot. Like it was, and I was just a consultant, if you will. It wasn't my full-time job. I was part of a 6-person scouting staff. And even that was a thin staff, comparatively speaking, to the rest of the league in terms of numbers. I think you can get and you can build a department of scouting that's a little bit different than what we traditionally think. Not scouting other teams, but literally not even player personnel and like, give me analytics about our guys. And again, it's not 30 NBA teams. We're talking about 300, but you can whittle that down to about maybe 5 or 6 mid-major conferences, and obviously the Power Four. So take 10 conferences, and you go through those 150, times to maybe 1,000 players. I know it sounds like a lot, but I think you can have someone oversee, and that's all they're doing. They're not worried about if you're playing Duke tomorrow or what we're going to do against Clemson or what happens when we have to go to the ACC tournament and where we're going to eat dinner and what hotel. They are doing none of that. What they are only doing is everything else, to the point where I think you brought up, Michael, early on, like, okay, here's who we have. here are the top 100 guys for what we do, for what you want to do, for what we need. This is a professionalization of the highest level that I don't think you need to necessarily go full on nuclear and say, we need 14 people doing these 6 things. Even if it has an assistant, let's start it where we can make the biggest impact first, because that impact also trickles down. It's the impact on the court. And if you can go out and put together, and mind you now, these guys are all a little bit averse to having 15 scholarships. Because if I'm a kid that wants to be recruited in Division I, and I think I have a chance, I'm not going to do the old way of doing it. I'm literally going to call the schools that I want to go to and tell them I want to go there. And I don't want any money. I just want a scholarship. If I'm a coach coaching 15 kids, and I know I don't have to pay 3 of them, just give them a scholarship, come on in. And then if you earn it, you earn it. And if it goes the way it's supposed to go, it goes. Having a person on your staff whose 110% sole responsibility is everybody else, I think is the number one, if not 1A, most valuable thing a program like NC State can do right now, where you're not worried about anything about everyone else, and then vet them as best you can to bring them to a point where you have this small group that you can choose from to go out and then figure out, what can we offer them? What kind of playing time? Where does this fit in? Everything else that comes with being a part of the team. I think if you're Booth, that's the investment, as opposed to just blowing it up and making the investment to a whole new way of doing things, given the fact that it's at least 2028, if not 2030, before any change happens, if it happens at all.
Whether you are moving locally, nationally, or even internationally, and whether you're a residential or commercial customer, please consider our friends at XL Moving and Storage, an award-winning Allied Van Lines agent with offices in Greensboro and Raleigh. Thanks to their 25 years of experience helping North Carolinians all across the state with their moving and storage needs, XL has become the trusted hometown North Carolina moving services company. Our good friends Jim Dorsett and Jody Hatley, along with their hardworking staff, offer customized, tailored relocation and storage solutions to the people of North Carolina and beyond. Visit them online today at xlms.com. That's EXCELMS.com.
David, in the latest Ken Palm ratings, the ACC has only one team among the top 26 in that very important metrics. Are we seeing a generational low for the quality of basketball in the Atlantic Coast Conference right now?
I'll give you a short answer and then a longer answer, as you know I'm infamous for. The short answer is, if the ACC, put my opinion aside, just numerically, if the ACC gets 5 or fewer invitations to this year's NCAA tournament, which is certainly a possibility as we speak, with only Duke, Clemson, and Louisville in, let's say, comfortable positions, it would be the league's worst participation rate in the big dance since that event expanded to 64, now 68 teams, way back in 1985. And it's not that, just to be clear, it's not that 5 bids would be a record low for the ACC. There have been times, even in my time covering the league, when the ACC was a smaller conference and it got only 3 teams into the NCAA tournament's 64/68 team version. But percentage-wise, now that the ACC is this 18-school monstrosity, getting only 5 out of 18 would be, numerically speaking, again, objectively, the league's worst performance ever in what we call the modern era, which is since 1985. Again, prior to that, the NCAA tournament was smaller, sometimes much smaller. Prior to that, there were some restrictions on how many teams per conference were even allowed to get to the NCAA tournament. So prior to 1985, it's almost impossible to play the apples-to-apples comparison game. But since 85, to be clear, there have been years when the ACC got only 1/3 of its members into the big dance. So right now, 1/3 would be 6 out of 18. So if the ACC gets 6 this year, they would essentially tie their low if you're willing to equate 6 out of 18 with, 3 out of 9 back in the day or 4 out of 12, all of those, of course, exactly 1/3 of your league. The example that came up earlier, 1999, remember the ACC was only a 9-team league at that point. And in 1999, even though that Duke team was off the charts, the league only got 3 teams into the NCAA tournament. So 3 out of 9 is not great. 1/3 exactly, but unlike this year where it's only Duke in that stratosphere, in 1999, Duke, Maryland, and Carolina all made it, but Duke was a 1 seed, Maryland was a 2 seed, Carolina was a 3 seed. So all 3 of the participants were prominent participants. And as it turned out, Duke and Maryland both made the Sweet 16 that year. Devils went on to play in that national championship game that they lost to UConn. So 3 out of 9 doesn't sound quite as bad when you got a team playing in the national championship and you have 2 teams in the Sweet 16. Similarly, there was a low point in 2006. By this point, the ACC had 12 members, only 4 got in. So again, that's exactly 1/3 of your league. But again, Duke was a 1 seed that year. Carolina was a 3 seed that year. Boston College, believe it or not, was a 4 seed that year. And NC State also got kind of a bubble bid as a 10 seed. That year, Duke and BC made the Sweet 16, but that was it for the ACC. So the combination of only 4 invitations in 2006 and getting nobody past the Sweet 16, that is about as bad as it's gotten for the ACC since 1985, again, the modern era of the larger NCAA tournament bracket. And obviously, lastly, these last 3 seasons have included a lot of negative narratives for the ACC. They have been a 15-team league, and what have they gotten? 5 and 5 and 5. So once again, it's that sort of baseline lowest bar of expectations. Get 1/3 of your league in. For the past 3 seasons in a row, it's been exactly that. 5 out of 15, 5 out of 15, 5 out of 15. But in each of those 3 years, remember, even though there were those negative regular season narratives, and even though it's only 1/3 of your conference, which again is bad by ACC standards, in all 3 years, the ACC got at least 1 team to the Final Four. It was Duke and Carolina in the 2022 Final Four. It was Miami the next year. It was, of course, NC State last season. So even with these recent sort of historic lows and negatives, the ACC's best teams, the ones that made the NCAA tournament, did have some high seeds and did make some long runs. This year, again, if only 5 teams make it, that would absolutely be an historic low for the league percentage-wise. And because even if it's only 5, if only Duke, as Coach Keating said earlier, if only Duke is even in the conversation for those top 4 seed lines, meaning the top 16 teams in America, that's a really rare combination of lack of depth, 5 bids perhaps, but also a lack of quality at the top, with Duke maybe getting a number 1 seed. But, depending on how Clemson and Louisville finish, I don't think there'll be another prominent seed from the ACC. So that's a longer way of saying this league better figure out a way to get to 6 bids now that it's an 18-team league, because it used to get 5 bids, Coach and Mike. It regularly got 5 or 6 bids when it was an 8 or 9-team league. So you can't double in size and still be happy with 5 or 6 bids. But that's where we are. The bottom line is that the ACC averaged 5 NCAA tournament bids per year back when it was an 8 or 9-team league. So if you're back to averaging 5 bids per year, now that you're 15 teams or 18 teams, you are falling way short of your usual very high standard as a basketball league.
And if you're in college basketball, Coach Keating, once you get to this part of the season, your roster is pretty much set. You don't have the latitude that in the NBA, you can trade a Luka Doncic to the Los Angeles Lakers and get Anthony Davis to go to the Dallas Mavericks. Do you think there's going to come a day with all these changes coming up in college basketball that you will one day see trades in college basketball? And what are some of those hypothetical trades that you might be cooking up in your mad scientist head?
Well, you read my mind as David was talking. I was looking at an aggregation of all the closet mathematicians we have that are now out in the ether, just telling who's going to make the tournament on February 1st. And as of right now, there's only three ACC teams, and one of those, I'm sorry, it's four. And Pittsburgh's one of the last four in. Wake first out, SMU third out, Carolina eighth out. So it's not looking good heading into the stretch run. As I mentioned in our open, that's why I like where Wake is at, given the comparison of the schedules, that if they can go 7-3 and go 15-5, that probably gets them enough of those requisite wins to put themselves in those first 44, if you will. I thought about that because obviously this weekend, the entire world was hit by an earthquake in the middle of the night where an all-NBA, first five-time first all-NBA player got traded off a team that's middling in the NBA to get to playoffs, and Luka Doncic getting traded for Anthony Davis. Everybody thought it was fake. And right away, I thought about that. And like, you know what? We just spent a whole bunch of time talking about the professionalization of the staff for college basketball, about the professionalization of not only coaches being able to move for greener pastures, but now players a little bit more freely. I don't think there's really any time on the horizon that's going to stop players from being able to not only move midseason, but potentially play, because that's what professionalization is. It's going to probably take someone to challenge that. Everybody loves to be that one guy to step up. David will appreciate that. Find someone who's really legally challenged to go take on the NCAA and say, okay, I want my guy to be able to play next week, even though he was at Vanderbilt last week. He's going to play for Alabama next week. It's going to happen. Someone's going to try to do it. Hypothetically, what I thought about is, who could the Tar Heels use right now in college basketball that would just instantly fix almost all of their problems? And clearly we know that their guard contingent is pretty talented, but what big guys out there could really make a huge difference? Now, clearly we'd love to go right down 15-501 and go take some of Duke's guys because they got enough of them and they're big. Love to take a few big guys off of Duke. But who would those guys be? There's some guys at Houston and Auburn right now that I think Carolina would love to have from a defensive standpoint and also from an offensive standpoint that I think would make all of these ills go away if you're from a Carolina standpoint. I love to play that. What was that game? Stratomatic. Remember the Stratomatic back in the day, and just start moving guys around and kind of roll the dice and see what happens. Those would be great trade machines if someone could go out there and make that happen, even hypothetically for college basketball right now. But Michael, I think it's inevitable. It's going to be challenged at some point once all of the salary cap gets put in the ether, if they are so inclined to unionize, if they have to collectively bargain, even if they are 1099 type employees, provide them with some sort of benefits. There's a whole host of clerical things that are coming down the pike here that the average fan is really not paying much attention to, because they just want to see what happens on the court. They want to know what happens in March. They just want to watch the game. But all of these other things inevitably have such a huge effect, as we've talked about. Case in point, Duke and Carolina, with the results on the floor, because they all affect the guys that are, let's face it, even though some of them may be older and they're maybe sixth year, you're still dealing in large part with 18 to 24-year-olds. Volatile enough of a group as it is, you're going to have some sort of focus to get them to be at their very best, given all the resources you may have, all the things in place to get them ready for those 2 hours to play once or twice a week. I think you really have to take into account that there may be some even more movement and get ahead of that as much as you can if you're in college basketball right now, because it's inevitable that change is coming. But this is change of a time where a lot of us have never, ever seen before, but it's going to be the way of the world coming forward. This is true professionalization of college athletics at its best.
If you are anywhere near Wilmington, North Carolina, and looking for a little live music, a cold beer, a tangy slushie, a fun crowd, or just a taste of the good life at the beach, Jimmy's Bar in Wrightsville Beach is the place for you. Located on North Lumina Avenue, just one block from the sand and waves of the Atlantic Ocean, Jimmy's features a full bar with nightly beer and drink specials, and it hosts musical performers almost every day of the year. One more fun fact, Jimmy's annual Children's Bike Drive, which started in 2017, now distributes more than 1,000 bicycles and helmets per year to young people in the Wilmington area and beyond. Jimmy's Bar, your home away from home on Lumina Avenue in Wrightsville Beach.
Big weekend ahead of college basketball. Duke on the road at Clemson Saturday night. North Carolina has an entire week off before they entertain Jeff Capel and Jason Capel at the Smith Center for the second time in about 10 days. So, guys, it's time now for our weekly look ahead. Coach Keating, we'll start off with you, and then David, you can follow up and close out today's show.
Yeah, I'm going to keep riding the Wake Forest train. I mean, I think this is the change in the ACC for having to go to the West Coast and play. And we don't need to channel our inner Mick Cronin right here to talk about the differences and how it has the effects the differences in time zones have on their players going east to west, west to east. But we're going to really find out right here if this is a team that can go on the road, go to California maybe for the first time for a weekend and play 2 games. You can stay in the same hotel out there. I mean, I've been out there. You can go to the Claremont and you can stay in Berkeley. And if you want to make a little bit of an extra time trip down to Palo Alto, but there's ones that are clearly closer across the street from the campus in Palo Alto. Either way, it's not like you have to get on a plane or drive 4 or 5 hours. It's right down the road. It's a doable logistical trip. The question becomes, and especially in the case of Stanford, a middling team that may ride a little bit of momentum to have a chance to be this year's NC State if Duke so happens to falter in the ACC tournament and win the tournament and become a representative. I think it's a huge weekend for Wake Forest to get to that point where they can solidify their chance to just keep creeping up, just keep winning, just keep winning, keep winning. Don't worry about the prognostications and the numbers and who this. One game at a time, get to your coach speak. Let's focus on this. But this trip to go and play Stanford and Cal right now in 2 very winnable games for Wake Forest, I think looms large for the Demon Deacons.
Yeah, one quick note on that game, and that is the best midweek game of this week, Wake at Stanford. I always believe that on Selection Sunday, the place that the committee starts is what are your best wins. I know bad losses matter, other things matter, strength of schedule matters, but I really believe it starts with what are your best wins. And the bottom line is if Wake goes to Stanford and wins, it would be the Deacons' 4th best win of the year. That matters. Remember, they had that huge win over Michigan back in November, and they have the more recent home victories over both Pitt and Carolina. So that's 3 pretty good wins. This would be their 4th really good win. And as Coach mentioned, it would be their best road win of the season. The committee looks for that. Some of those other Wake bubble teams lacked a good road win. So the Deacs could change that on Wednesday night at Stanford. The other games that I'm looking forward to in conference and out of conference, Pitt is at UNC on Saturday afternoon. Obviously, they're both bubble teams. When the Panthers had the Tar Heels on their home court, the Panthers got the win. Now it's UNC's turn to try to defend its home court. And in the Tar Heels case, they're down to just 3 more regular season opportunities to post impressive resume builders. The biggest would be Duke and Chapel Hill, of course, on March 8th in that regular season finale. The second biggest chance for the Tar Heels would be that trip to Clemson next week. This Pitt game on Saturday afternoon is really the only other matchup between now and the ACC tournament where the Heels can get a win that truly bolsters their resume. So I'll be watching that on Saturday afternoon. Duke is at Clemson on Saturday night. We know both of these are NCAA tournament caliber teams. But if Duke is going to make history, as Coach Keating said, the Mike Krzyzewski Blue Devils of a quarter century ago, right? 1999, a little bit more than a quarter century, that Duke team under Coach K with Elton Brand and Trajan Langdon, Will Avery, Corey Maggette, Chris Carrawell, Shane Battier, those guys are the last ACC team, the most recent, to go undefeated in conference play. Back then it was 16-0. Nowadays, obviously, the Blue Devils, who are undefeated in conference play as we speak, 11-0. They have a chance to get to 20-0. Nobody has ever done that. I believe Duke's toughest remaining regular season game is that matchup at Littlejohn Coliseum on Saturday night. So that's must-see TV. And finally, you know I love giving some love to the little guys. UNC Asheville and High Point are the 2 best teams in the Big South Conference. They play each other Saturday night. So basically, Coach Mike Morrell, who's from that Shaka Smart coaching tree, he was with Shaka at both VCU and Texas. He has maybe, if not the best, one of the best teams of his 7 seasons at UNC Asheville. The Bulldogs did go to the NCAA tournament under Coach Morrell just 2 years ago. They might do it again this year. They have a guy named Jordan Marsh who previously played at App State, about 5'10" guard, really, really good player, like first team all Big South caliber player, and he gets plenty of help from his teammates. If you haven't seen High Point, I mentioned Coach Alan Huss. He is from that Greg McDermott Creighton coaching tree. Coach Huss is only in his second season at High Point. Last year, they won the Big South's regular season title, but High Point, which has never played in the Division I NCAA tournament, they won the regular season. Of course, the automatic NCAA tournament bid goes to the conference tournament champion. High Point, after winning the regular season a year ago in Coach Huss's first year, did not win the tournament, so they did not kick that NCAA tournament door down. They have a guy named Kamani Hamilton, High Point, formerly of Mississippi State. He's the Panthers' best player. They also have a guard named Damarian Williams, formerly of Texas Tech, another of the best players in the entire Big South. So 3 or 4 of the best players in that league will be on the court against each other and with each other on Saturday night as UNC Asheville visits High Point. Earlier this year, they played in Asheville, and the Bulldogs did win a 103-99 thriller. So same two teams, offensively talented and diverse and skilled. They get the rematch is in High Point on Saturday night. It'll go a long way toward determining the Big South's regular season champion this year, and of course those top few seeds in the Big South tournament later this year.
We've been talking basketball for almost an hour and a half, but I've not asked you guys from Jersey and from Philly who you got in the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday. Is it going to be a three-peat for the Kansas City Chiefs, or are the Eagles going to fly away with their second world championship in the last decade?
Well, I got to bet on my Eagles, right? I mean, I grew up in Philly. I saw them beat the Patriots in Minneapolis. I was there for the first Super Bowl title in the history of the Eagles organization. I was there in person with my son, Anthony. I am not going to New Orleans this year. I'll be watching like everybody else. We may host a little party here at the Glenn household. Only Eagles fans will be invited. So you have to be nice about that. Mike, Coach, you're welcome to drop by, but you have to root for the Eagles. And I mean, you guys know the bottom line. The Chiefs and the Eagles, either team could win. I mean, I'm picking the Eagles, and I try to be objective in virtually everything else that I do. I'm not at all objective when it comes to the Eagles against the Chiefs. I think the combination of that fantastic running game with Saquon Barkley, one of the better Eagles defenses of recent years, and then the quarterback, Jalen Hurts, when you need him to do good things, he can. That's a pretty tough combination to beat. But I also thought that 2 years ago when the Chiefs beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl, and all of my party visitors went home unhappy, especially me.
I don't know how you bet against the witch at quarterback, because that dude Mahomes does stuff that, and the stats speak for themselves. But I like the transformer ability of Saquon Barkley. So I have some family who spent a lot of time in Kansas. Obviously, my dad and mom were at Kansas for 16 years. They became de facto Chiefs fans just because. But growing up in the New York metropolitan area, not necessarily loyal to the Giants or to the Jets, I'd probably be looked upon with a little bit of a side eye if I chose the Phillies. I did have some roommates that were in South Jersey / Philly, if you will. Somehow Cherry Hill, New Jersey is in Philadelphia. We all know how that geographic.
It's fascinating how many of those South Jersey people root for Philly teams. And you get to other parts of Jersey, and there's no way they would ever root for a Philly team.
I love trying to have the conversation with people who try to describe New Jersey geography, that New Jersey isn't really a state. It's just a cutout of it, that they couldn't divide Philly and New York. They just said, okay, figure it out on your own. I like the Eagles in this, to be honest with you. I do like the fact that A.J. Brown is starting to become a little bit more of a threat. If Hurts is not hurt, if he is healthy, and certainly the 2 weeks off is probably the biggest thing that could have happened for the Eagles, is to get him fully ready to go. Obviously, mentally be ready, but physically ready. I like Philadelphia by a field goal.
I don't have that many guys left in the NFL that I worked with. Last year, I lost Jason Kelsey from a time at Cincinnati. So I still had Travis, though Travis was a little bit of a problem child towards my end of my tenure at Cincinnati. But I still root for Travis Kelsey. And I've got a feeling that some way that witch is going to come through and he's going to make something happen, that the Chiefs win. But here's my big prediction, that it's a walk-off for Travis Kelce, that he retires after the three-peat. I think this is the right time for him. He's had an up and down year. I think he has a lot of stuff going on outside of football. There's no inside information, some scuttlebutt going back on some group text, but it would not surprise me. But I do love Saquon Barkley, and it's the best time of the year, man. We've got football coming to an end and basketball about to heat up, and we're going to cover it right here each and every week on the North Carolina Sports Network. Again, like we said at the top of the show, we have Bacon and Basketball, our big bracket promotion coming up, courtesy of the North Carolina Pork Council, where you can win free bacon for a year if you win the men's bracket, the women's bracket, or you can be named the North Carolina Hoops Hog. We might even do something to where you can beat not only DG or Coach Keating this year. We had that last year. It'll be a lot of fun. Be sure to stay tuned for that. Bacon and Basketball, our big March Madness promotion right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. We ask you to like and subscribe our content on YouTube. Check out our website, ncsportsnetwork.com, and follow us on all of the social platforms at the NC Sports Net. For the coach, Kerry Keating, for the ACC expert, David Glenn, I'm Mike Waddell, signing off right here all across the Old North State from Murphy to Manteo on the North Carolina Sports Network.